Hello Year 10, today we are going to finish the play. It's very exciting. So we're going to summarise your final impressions of the characters at the end of the play. So what impression does Priestley leave us with? So the word that we're going to recall is patriarchal. So how is Sheila presented as a victim of patriarchy in the play? And our new word today is ridicule. So to ridicule someone means to mock or make fun of someone. So how have Sheila and Eric been ridiculed by their parents? Think about the way that they have been treated and talked down to. So you can pause the video and just make some notes answering those questions. So Sheila's a victim of patriarchy, firstly because she's been brought up to show that her only purpose is to look pretty and land herself a rich husband. She has a very narrow view of the world because she's never been exposed to anything else. She just thinks exactly what her parents want her to think. We're also told that no matter how badly Gerald treats her, he can cheat on her, keep a mistress, and that's just what men do, so she should put up with it. She should also put up with being ignored by her husband, who's very busy at work. And we see that Sheila as a woman is someone who's very much talked down to by the other characters, including her mother. So ridicule, how have Sheila and Eric been ridiculed by their parents? Well, in the scene that we read yesterday, we see that they are both ridiculed for not behaving sensibly. They should be pleased that the police inspector isn't real. They should be pleased that they can get away with it. And the parents cannot understand why Sheila and why Eric are so upset by what's happened. They just think they're being childish and immature. When of course Priestley is showing us they are being the opposite. It is actually Mr. and Mrs. Burling who we should ridicule because they cannot accept responsibility for what they've done. It is Sheila and Eric who he wants the audience to admire here. So we are going to read the last little bit of the play today. Okay? So where we got to yesterday was Gerald beginning to question whether Eva Smith or any girl is actually dead and what evidence they have. So they've worked out that the police inspector isn't real. Now they're trying, Gerald at least here, is trying to break down the situation even further. So Gerald says, but is it a fact? So is it a fact that she's dead? And Eric says, of course it is. You don't know the whole story yet. And Sheila says, I suppose you're going to prove now you didn't spend last summer keeping this girl instead of seeing me, eh? Gerald says, I did keep a girl last summer. I've admitted it and I'm sorry, Sheila. And Sheila says, well, I must admit, you came out of it better than the rest of us. The inspector said that. And Burling says angrily, he wasn't an inspector. And Sheila says, flaring up, well, he inspected us all right. And don't let's start dodging and pretending now. Between us, we drove that girl to commit suicide. So yet again, accepting responsibility. And Gerald says, did we? Who says so? Because I say there's no more real evidence we did than there was that this chap was a police inspector. So Gerald is saying, well, actually, what evidence do we have that any girl has died? And Sheila says, of course there is. And Gerald says, no, there isn't. Look at it. He comes here pretending to be a police officer. It's a hoax of some kind. So, it's a trick. Now, what does he do? Very artfully, working on bits of information he's picked up here and there, he bluffs us into confessing that we've all been mixed up in this girl's life in some way or another. And Eric says, and so we have. And Gerald says, but how do you know it's the same girl? So yes, they all did something, but how do they know that what they did to the same girl? Burling says eagerly, now wait a minute, let's see how that would work. Now, no it wouldn't. And Eric says, we all admitted it. Gerald says, all right, you all admitted something to do with the girl, but again, how do you know it's the same girl? He looks round triumphantly at them as they puzzle this out. He turns to Burling after a pause. Look here, Mr. Burling, you sack a girl called Eva Smith. You've forgotten, but he shows you a photograph of her and then you remember, right? Burling says, yes, that part's straightforward enough. But what then? Gerald says, well, then he happens to know that Sheila once had a girl sacked from Millward's shop. He tells us that it's the same Eva Smith, and he shows her a photograph that she recognises. And Sheila says, yes, the same photograph. But Gerald says, how do you know it's the same photograph? Did you see the one that your father looked at? And Sheila says, no, I didn't. And Gerald says, and did your father see the one that he showed you? And Sheila says, no, he didn't. And I see what you mean now. And Gerald says, we've no proof that it was the same photograph, and therefore no proof it was the same girl. So what Gerald is saying here is actually, yes, he showed them a photograph, but he could have had several different photographs of several different girls. So how do they know that the girl Mr. Burling fired was also the girl that Sheila fired? Now take me. I never saw a photograph. It's supposed to be saw, not was. I never saw a photograph, remember. He caught me out by suddenly announcing that this girl had changed her name to Daisy Renton. I gave myself away at once because I had known a Daisy Renton. And Burling says eagerly, and there wasn't the slightest proof that this Daisy Renton was really Eva Smith. We've only his word for it, and with his word for it that he was a police inspector. And we know now that he was lying. So he could have been lying all the time. And Gerald says, of course he could, probably was. Now what happened after I left? Mrs. Burling says, I was upset because Eric had left the house, and this man said that if Eric didn't come back, he'd have to go out and find him. Well, that made me feel worse still, and his manner was so severe, and he seemed so confident. And then quite suddenly he said I'd seen Eva Smith only 2 weeks ago. Those were his exact words, says Burling. And Mrs. Burling says, yes, and like a fool, I said I had. And Burling says, I don't see now why you did that. She didn't call herself Eva Smith when she came to see you at the committee, did she? So again, remember, she didn't give her real name to Mrs. Burling. Mrs. Burling says, no, of course she didn't. But feeling so worried when he suddenly turned on me with those questions, I answered more or less as he wanted me to answer. And Sheila says, but Mother, don't forget that he showed you a photograph of the girl before that, and you obviously recognised it. Gerald said, did anybody else see it? Mrs. Burling says, no, he showed it only to me. And Gerald says, then don't you see there's still no proof it was really the same girl? He might have shown you the photograph of any girl who applied to the committee. And how do we know she really was Eva Smith or Daisy Renton? So the girl that could have gone to Mrs. Burling's charity could have been, again, not Eva Smith, not Daisy Renton, a completely different girl. Burling says, Gerald's dead right. He could have used a different photograph each time, and we'd be none the wiser. We may have all been recognising different girls. And Gerald says, exactly. Did he ask you to identify a photograph, Eric? And Eric said, no, he didn't need a photograph by the time it got round to me. But obviously it must have been the girl I knew who went to see Mother. So Eric's like, well, me and Mrs. Burling must have seen the same girl. And Gerald says, why must it? And Eric said she had to have help because she wouldn't take any more stolen money. And the girl I knew had told me that already. And Gerald says, even then, that may have all been nonsense. And Eric says, I don't see much nonsense about it when a girl goes and kills herself. You lot may be letting yourself out nicely, but I can't, nor can Mother. We did her in all right. And Burling says eagerly, wait a minute. Don't be such a hurry to put yourself into court. That interview with your mother could be just as much a put-up job, like all this police business. The whole damn thing could have been a piece of bluff. So he's saying the girl could have been on, that went to Mrs. Burling, could have been another actor like the inspector, part of this whole hoax. And Eric says angrily, how can I? The girl's dead. The girl's dead, isn't she? And Gerald says, what girl? There were probably 4 or 5 different girls. And Eric says, that doesn't matter to me. The one I knew is dead. And Burling says, is she? How do we know she is? And Gerald said, that's right, you've got it. How do we know any girl killed herself today? And Burling says, looks at them all triumphantly. Now answer that one. Let's look at it from this fellow's point of view. We're having a little celebration here and feeling rather pleased with ourselves. Now, he has to work a trick on us. Well, the first thing he has to do is give us such a shock that he can bluff us all at the same time. So he starts right off. A girl has just died in the infirmary, drank some strong disinfectant, died in agony. And Eric says, all right, don't pile it on. And Burling says triumphantly, there you are, see, just repeating it shakes you a bit. And that's what he had to do, shake us at once, and then start questioning us, until we didn't know where we were. Oh, let's admit that. He had the laugh of us all right. And Eric said he could laugh his head off if I knew it really was all a hoax. Burling says, I'm convinced it is. No police inquiry. No one girl this all happened to. And what he cares about the most, no scandal. And Sheila says, and no suicide? Gerald says decisively, we can settle that at once. Sheila says, how? Gerald says, by ringing up the infirmary. Either there's a dead girl there or there isn't. Burling says uneasily, it will look a bit queer, won't it, ringing up at this time of night? And Gerald says, I don't mind doing it. And Mrs. Burling says emphatically, and if there isn't? And Gerald says, anyway, we'll see. So he's going to now call the hospital to see if they've had any girl admitted. He goes to the telephone and looks up the number, and the others watch tensely. Bromley 8986. Is that the infirmary? This is Mr. Gerald Croft of Crofts Limited. Yes, we're rather worried about one of our employees. Have you had a girl brought in this afternoon who committed suicide by drinking disinfectant? Or any like suicide? Yes, I'll wait. As he waits, the others show their nervous tension. Burling wipes his brow. Sheila shivers. Eric clasps and unclasps his hand, etc. And Gerald says, yes, you're certain? You're certain of that? I see. Well, thank you very much. Good night. He puts down the telephone and looks at them. No girl has died in there today. Nobody's been brought in after drinking disinfectant. They haven't had a suicide in months. So this is really important. There is no dead girl. So there's no police inspector and now no dead girl. And Burling says triumphantly, there you are, proof positive. The whole story is just a lot of moonshine nonsense. Nothing but an elaborate sell. He produces a huge sigh of relief. Nobody likes to be sold as badly as that. But for all that, he smiles at them all. Gerald, have a drink. And Gerald, smiling, says, thanks. I think I could do with one just now. Burling says, so could I. Mrs. Burling, smiling, and I must say, Gerald, you've argued this very cleverly, and I'm most grateful. Gerald says, going for his drink, well, you see, while I was out of the house, I'd time to cool off and think things out a little. Burling gives him a drink and says, yes, he didn't keep you on the run as he did the rest of us. I admit now, he gave me a bit of a scare at the time, but had a special reason for not wanting any public scandal just now. So remember, that's his knighthood. So he has his drink and raises his glass. Well, here's to us. Come on, Sheila. Don't look like that. All over now. Sheila says the worst part is, but you're forgetting one thing I still can't forget. Everything we said had happened really happened. If it didn't end tragically, then that's lucky for us, but it might have done. So Sheila's attitude remains the same. She says we're lucky that no girl died, but that doesn't mean that we still didn't do all of the horrible things we did. But Burling says jovially, happily, but the whole thing's different now. Come, you can see that, can't you? He imitates the inspector in his final speech. You all helped to kill her. And he points at Sheila and Eric, laughing. So he's ridiculing them. Think about our word from the start. He's making fun of them. And I wish you could have seen the look on your faces when he said that. So Sheila moves towards the door. Going to bed, young woman? She says tersely, I want to get out of this. It frightens me, the way you talk. So she can't be around them. She's so disgusted. Burling says, nonsense. You'll have a good laugh over it, Yolette. Look, you'd better ask Gerald for that ring back. That ring you gave to him back, hadn't you? Then you'll feel better. So again, get your pretty ring back, Sheila. Then you'll feel better. And of course, he just wants things to literally reset back to how they were. He wants this engagement to happen, remember. And Sheila says passionately, you're pretending everything's just as it was before. And Eric says, I'm not. And Sheila says, no, but these others are. Burling says, well, isn't it? We've been had, that's all. Sheila says, so nothing really happened. So there's nothing to be sorry for, nothing to learn. We can all go on behaving just as we did. And Mrs. Burling says, well, why shouldn't we? So why shouldn't we just move on and forget about it? And Sheila says, I tell you, whoever that inspector was, it was anything but a joke. You knew it then. You began to learn something, and now you've stopped. You're ready to go on in the same old way. And Burling says, amused, and you're not, eh? And Sheila says, no, because I remember what he said, and how he looked, and how he made me feel. Fire and blood and anguish, and it frightens me the way you talk, and I can't listen to any more of it. Now again, remember, this is Priestley's reference that if mankind don't change and learn the right lessons, then they'll be punished either through hell or through World War One and Two, which was, you know, for many essentially hell on earth. So it's really important to realise that Sheila and Eric have become the mouthpieces of Priestley once the inspector leaves. Saying, you know, you began to learn something, but now you're ready to go on in the same way. But I can't forget. And Eric says, and I agree with Sheila. It frightens me too. And Burling says, well, go to bed then. Don't stand there being hysterical. Mrs. Burling says, they're overtired. Yet again, patronising. How many times have we written that word? In the morning, they'll be as amused as we are. And Gerald says, everything's all right now, Sheila. What about this ring? So he feels the same as Mr. and Mrs. Burling. Sheila says, no, not yet. It's too soon. I must think. So, you know, we're proud of Sheila here. The fact that she doesn't accept the ring back shows that she's changed. You know, she can't just pretend and go back. Burling pointing to Eric and Sheila. Now look at the pair of them. The famous younger generation who know it all. And they can't even take a joke. Now remember, this is really important because we've got this generational divide here. The telephone rings sharply. Remember the doorbell. This should remind you of when it says the doorbell rings sharply. And that was the inspector's arrival. And now suddenly the telephone also rings sharply. So it's creating real tension here. We're supposed to think back to the inspector's arrival. There is a moment's complete silence. And Burling goes to answer it. Yes, Mr. Burling speaking. What? Here? But obviously the other person has rung off. He puts the telephone down slowly and looks in a panic-stricken fashion at the others. And Burling says, that was the police. A girl has just died on her way to the infirmary after swallowing some disinfectant. And a police inspector is on his way here to ask some questions. As they stare guiltily and dumbfounded, the curtain falls. The end. So, every time I read this, and it's a shame that I'm not seeing your reactions right now, this is the 14th, 13th or 14th, possibly 14th year 11 class that I've done this book with, and every time we have the same conversation. There are some students that read the end of this play and go, that's really annoying, what's all that about? And there are others that think it's very, very clever. Because essentially, there is a girl that has died. And a real policeman is now on his way to ask them questions. So what has just happened? Who was the police inspector? What was the police inspector? How did he know this was going to happen? Why go to the Burling family before this all happened? So if we were in front of each other now, we'd discuss this. So I'm just going to very quickly try and summarise some ideas here to some of the questions you might have. First things first, the ending of the play doesn't really matter. What matters is that Priestley wrote this play as a piece of political propaganda to convert his audience to socialist views. Okay? So who or what the police inspector was doesn't really matter, because what matters is his message. Okay, his message remains the same. But there are several ways to interpret who the inspector was. Now, the first one is that he was some sort of ghost or spirit. And ghoul, you know, is a homophone for ghoul, which is a ghost. Remember, a homophone are words that sound the same. So you've got things like there, and there are homophones, for example. They sound the same, but they're spelt differently and mean different things. So some people say the fact that the inspector is Inspector Ghoul, because it's a homophone, sounds like ghoul, means that he was a ghost. Others say that he was a concerned citizen, maybe a associate of Eva Smith's. And actually he went to the Burling family because a normal policeman would probably treat them respectfully and not be afraid to ask the hard questions. It took someone like the police inspector to make them admit the truth. So imagine this normal policeman arrives now. Do you think for 1 second that Sheila and Eric are going to allow her parents to bluff their way out of it? You know, think about their reactions. They don't feel like anyone should get away with it. So did the fake inspector, whoever or whatever he was, did he come around there to convert Eric and Sheila to this socialist ideology, to make sure that actually the Burling family will learn a lesson and they will be made to repent for what they've done and make up for it? But at the end of the day, no matter what the answers to these questions are and whatever your own personal interpretation is, what remains unchanged is Priestley's socialist message, and that is the really important thing to grasp. Okay, so we finished the play. That, guys, apart from the poetry that we've got to mop up, that's our texts done. We're obviously going to revise them next year, and we'll particularly revise An Inspector Calls, obviously, because we've done it in these me rambling to myself on camera sort of ways. But that's all of the set texts done, so that's always a good moment. So, what I'd like you to do is write a summary of your final impressions of Mr. Burling, Mrs. Burling, Eric, Sheila and Gerald at the end of the play. And if you can, see if you can link your impression to Priestley's intention. So why does Priestley want us to end the play with that the impression we have of these different characters? So again, think about the sorts of things Mr. Burling and the others symbolise. So we know Mr. Burling symbolises capitalism, we know Gerald symbolises the aristocracy, we know Eva Smith symbolises the working class. We know Mrs. Burling symbolises the sort of social snobbery and hypocrisy of the higher classes. We know Eric represents this idea of white male privilege. We know Sheila, you know, is our model for change, and this idea of actually we should be like Sheila in the way that we've been converted, and Eric as well. Okay, so write a summary of your final impressions of these characters and link them to Priestley's intentions if you can. So, you can pause the video and get that done. But what I want to talk to you about finally is the task that I want you to do tomorrow. Now remember, you get a video lesson on Monday, Tuesday and Wednesday, and I don't need to see any of that work. I will then set you work to complete on Thursday independently from any video, and it is that work that I want you to send me. So what I'd like you to do is rate the characters in order of the most to the least to blame for Eva Smith's suicide. So I rattled on about Gerald and how accountable I think Gerald is for her suicide. So I might put Gerald at the top of my list. So Gerald might be my number one. I might then say, okay, Mrs. Burling, I think Mrs. Burling is my number two, and so on. So rate the characters in order of most to blame to least to blame. Then what I'd like you to do for each character, write an explanation of why you've placed that character at that point in the list. So if I put Gerald as my number one, why? Well, I'd write about how I think it's because he showed her this amazing, wonderful life and then took it away from her. And she said she'd never be as happy as that again. And this is someone that ultimately killed themselves. It's 6 months later. She realised that actually if her life was never going to be that good again, what's the point? Now that's just my personal interpretation. It's not the right one. I'm not JB Priestley. I don't know who he wants us to think. And really, it's a chain of events, essentially anyway. But this task, there is no right and wrong answer. It's about developing your personal critical opinion. Remember, that's the beauty of English literature. If you can justify your opinion based on textual evidence, then it's your opinion. I can't tell you you're wrong. Okay, and that's why English is fabulous and amazing and my very favourite. Okay, so rate the characters from most to blame to least to blame. Write a brief explanation as to why you've placed that character there, and then if you can, try and link that character to Priestley's intentions. Okay, so that's what I would like you to do tomorrow, and that is what I would like you to then send to me. Okay? It's really important that you are keeping up to date with these videos, get into a good routine of working. And I know those of you that are watching these every week, those of you that are emailing me every week, hopefully you're not the only ones listening to this message, because I know you know this already. So I suppose I'm talking to those of you that might dip in and out of these videos, those of you that might not email me your work. Very often it's really, really important that you watch the videos on the right day, that you send the work in to me, okay? And as always, if there's any help, anything I can do, you let me know. Okay? So, well done for finishing the play. We're going to do some work on the themes next week. See you later.